All
Yeah.
right. So I am here today with Mike Boyd, and I am so excited that you are here on the Shanny Pants Show. I'm very excited to hear more about your story. Why don't you give just kind of a brief introduction of who you are, and then I'll start asking you, of course, all the questions I have, because I have a lot of curiosity with this interview. So give us a brief introduction, Mike.
Sure. So I was born and raised in the Sacramento area, and when I was young, I was a latchkey kid, and I pretty much did what I wanted, went where I wanted, and lived the way I wanted. And then when I was 17 years old, I had an abrupt experience in life where I was separated from my family, from my friends, from my day-to-day environment, and ended up doing time as a young man when I was 17 years old. And at that point is where I became a Christian. But when I left my point of incarceration, then I still kind of lived the same way I did day to day. And, I really didn't have any guidance, didn't have any vision for my life. But ultimately, I started attending warehouse ministries in the greater Sacramento area. And I started to attend a 12-step program, which is similar to AA and NA. And, I learned a lot, and I felt very comfortable in that environment. And then, I had prior to becoming a part of that church, I had worked with a gentleman for a few years, and he introduced me to a different church that I had become somewhat interested in. And I think the thing that was attractive to me is it had a lot of boundaries that were set and that, were part of the culture. And it was attractive to me because for myself as a young man, growing up in Northern California, I had no boundaries. Well, I had a lack of boundaries.
Yeah.
So I think that's what drew me to it. And the second thing, which, I went round and round on my head on this and kind of thought maybe I'm just a little bit crazy, but I felt like I was led by God there. And why would God lead somebody to a church function that you ultimately came to believe and find out that it was a cult? And the reason for me is I believe maybe there's some unique things that he wanted me to learn and to share with other people someday.
Yeah.
And as a result, though, I had a lot of life's issues that spawned out of that. It amplified destructive behavior within my soul while I was in and a part of the cult. It amplified things like a struggle with love, value, and acceptance from others and from God. Pharisaical church cultures exasperate that in people because your spiritual temperature can never rise to a level that's acceptable in the eyes of others, in the eyes of the minister, so to speak, if you're trying to get some type of value or acceptance from them.
Right.
And it never works. It never fulfills. And that thing that is constant from God is love, value, and acceptance. And I ultimately learned that. But it took some time, and it took a long, long hot fire in my life to grasp that. And it was painful.
Yeah.
But ultimately, when I was about 44 years of age, and I was probably about 24 years into the cult, is when I believe God started to download into me the dysfunction of our church function. And I call it cult church. That's what it was to me. And little by little, I started to grasp that and the unique dynamics that parallel us to a cult. So over that 2-year period of time, I started to download that information to my wife, who was raised from within that cult from birth. And for her to capture it and to see it and grasp it in her mind was a miracle. And then for my kids, we raised our 3 kids there. When we started to download into them our dysfunction, our improper understanding or thinking, how we viewed and treated other people within our own cultic function, and how we saw people on the outside.
Mm-hmm.
When we started to download that into them, and they were well into their teenage years, you know, they were in their later teens, they
Yeah.
started to grasp it too.
Yeah.
And then ultimately at the very end is when I wrote a thesis and I wrote some other things, and it was explaining to the church hierarchy across the country how our unique function paralleled us to a cult. And that's the point where I exited stage left with my wife and my 3 kids and extracted them. And we
Mm-hmm.
left behind an entity that gripped our entire lives. It was a merry-go-round of dysfunction and activities, and we never really had any contact or function with people outside of our own circle. And so that was it was our all, it was our everything. Our whole life was centered around it.
Yeah.
And to me, it's very dysfunctional.
Right.
So anyhow, after about 2 years of coming out of it, I started to question God. I became extremely angry because I reflected back in the amount of family losses I had, friendship losses, my experiences that went on from within. And the reason I became extremely angry in my heart toward him was because I was looking at post or pre becoming a part of the cult church is I believe that, again, he truly led me there. So if he led me there and then I had all those losses that were extremely painful, then I started to become angry internally at God. And it went on for about 5 years. And after about 28 years of sobriety, I started to drink again, and I started to medicate those pains. And then ultimately I came to a place where I realized I needed to heal inside and address the issues. And I think the biggest healing point that I had was, and I started attending what's called CR. It's called Celebrate Recovery, and it's a worldwide institution, I guess you could call it, or group therapeutic functioning 12-step program that a lot of churches put on across the country and actually across the globe. But I started attending that, and the one thing that really just, I don't know if God put it in my head or what, but I just came to a place where I realized that God does not promise nice, neatly packaged lives to his people. And I, in my pride, thought that was owed to me by him. And when I was able to surrender that in my anger and stop drinking again.
Wow. Oh my God. It's like just the merry-go-round, back to it.
Yeah. So then
let's stop your story right there. Let's go back a little bit because I want to hear all about the recovery and kind of that process and more. And then we'll talk more about kind of what you've done after that or since then.
Okay.
Let's go back a little bit though, because for everyone who's listening, most people already know my situation and the cult that I come from, because, you know, I have the podcast and I talk about it all the time. So for everyone that, you know, is so curious about that, because everyone's always like, we want to hear more about your cult. Here's your opportunity, because Mike came from my cult. So we, our paths crossed, and I think, I don't know exactly my first memories of Mike, but they were on our property because Mike and his new wife lived in an apartment home, like rental home, on some acreage that my family lived on. So that's kind of how I knew of Mike and his wife. And then they obviously went to our meetings, you know, because everyone knows we weren't allowed to call it church. It was meetings. So that's how I knew Mike. So he's a little bit older than me. I was a kiddo which I'm sure you guys were probably kiddos when you got married too, because we all were. Yeah. That's just how we did things. But so I have some fond memories of Mike and his wife. His wife is like precious. And so we kind of we do come from the same cult, but with a lot of different views, because for most of you, you know, I was born into the cult, much like Mike's wife, and raised in it. married in it, and all those fun things. Mike's standpoint is a little bit different, which I would love to know a little bit more about just because of our age difference. Let's put that on a do not disturb. And our differences in ages obviously give us different experiences, but also Mike joining on his own into something that a lot of us, were born into. So I would love to hear a little bit more. Obviously, you spoke of that a little bit where you maybe had some addiction problems. You obviously had a lot of family dynamic stuff going on. And that brought you to the place where you had said you joined or started going to, I forget what church you said, another one.
Warehouse Ministries.
Mm-hmm. And then you met someone that brought you to our group. Was this when you were 17 or were you older when this happened?
Well, my first experiences of coming and being a part of the church cult was I was probably about 18 or 19 years of age, and it was one or two visits. So it wasn't really until 21 where I really came and started making myself a part of it and functioning, there on a regular basis.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So, and then how long did you say you got married at 23?
Yeah, I was 23 years old. My wife was 19.
Oh my gosh, yes. Oh, my
sure
goodness.
though.
Well, of course you were. Of course you were.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're old enough to have babies, you better just get married and, keep the process going.
The miracle is, though, is we have been married for almost 33 years now.
That is awesome. That is amazing. And I like to tell people, because when people hear our story, they're always like, how are you guys still married? And a lot of people from our background and from our cult are not. And rightfully so. Like, most of us probably should have never got married in the first place. So I am not surprised by the amount of divorce amongst our group, just because a lot of marriages never should have happened in the first place. People are like, oh, you're just so amazing because you guys are still married and da da da. And I'm like, well, it's not just amazing, like there has been so much work that has had to go into it, because it's a different marriage now, and I think people think, oh, you're so strong, and it's like, no, it's been a lot of work of unlearning things that we thought were right and relearning things, and it's I'm sure you could agree, it's a process, and it's been a hard one. And I like to say, like, we're still married now. I don't know what the plan is, but we're still married now, and we are happily married, and I'm very thankful for that. But it's amazing.
It's a journey.
It is a journey. It is a journey. Yeah. So once you got in, I'm assuming you very soon we don't call it dating, obviously, but you decided you probably wanted to marry your wife, I'm guessing.
Yeah.
And is that what made you stay, or were there other things that really kind of drew you in, or was that the main reason?
No, that wasn't the main reason. Prior to becoming a part, I knew I wanted to marry a godly lady, and my wife was that. And I saw a lot of attributes about her, as a young lady, where she really cared for people, and still does to this day. It's who she is. But the other, aspect was really, I liked what I saw. There were things that I call the sweet, the things that were the attracting points of the cult. And this is common for any religious institution, is there's things that draw people that make them want to be a part. So what I saw were families that seemingly were fairly well intact and multi-generational in their structure, their grandparents, parents, their kids. So you'd have, sometimes the dynamics would be 3 or 4 generations of people still functioning in the same religious institution, so to speak. But under the surface, you can't always see all the dysfunction that's there that is devastating, or misguided in their spiritual understanding. So anyhow, what I saw were, fairly intact families. I saw at times some, what I thought was good theological preaching.
Mm.
I saw, faithfulness. I saw camaraderie between, people, and care for one another. Those things were attractive to me.
Mm.
What I did not see, what I did not understand until about 24 years in was we were elitists. We
Mm.
thought we were God's unique called out body, which is paramount of pride.
Mm. Yeah.
We were totalistic. You better submit to the authorities that be, or they'll turn up the heat in a public setting or fashion, and they may go as far as pointing you out publicly if you don't comply to the cultural rules.
Yep.
And it gives no latitude for making spiritual decisions based on your connection to God and the Holy Spirit for yourself. So
Mm.
what it did in essence is I think it created multi-generational structure of people that were whitewashed walls.
Yeah.
They subscribed to the checklist of the preacher rather than
Mm.
the checklist of what does God want me to do and how does
Mm.
he want me to live on
Mm.
their own connection with him.
Mhm.
But anyhow, and then also
Yeah.
we were isolationists. I didn't capture that until after 24 years. We
Mm.
had almost nothing to do with anybody, including my own blood family. We'd see them maybe once every 2 or 3 years. I'd fly
Wow.
back to Virginia and come back to the West Coast, back to my homeland. And I lost a lot of years of that. And that
Mm.
was part of my great pain and anger. Uh,
Mm.
but anyhow, those are the things that I saw that are attractive, and then ultimately the things that I saw that were destructive. That ultimately those three tenets: totalism,
Mhm.
elitism, isolationism, that
Yeah.
we bear the mark of a cult.
Right, which we easily check off on that list.
Yes,
Uh,
we
yes. So, okay, so you talked a little bit there about your family of origin. So you say you saw them every so often. When you were younger, what did they think about that of you joining or starting to go to this group, or at that point were they really not a part of your life?
Well, they were still some at that point. Uh,
Okay.
I think what they thought is, it's just a phase. He'll come out of
Mm.
it.
Mm.
Uh, he typically lives a short burn on whatever he tries. and
Except for
this
the
and this
writing stuff.
and this one stuck. Like,
Of course.
oh man,
Oh, okay. And so then you saw them every once in a while then when you were apart for that 24 years of this cult.
yeah.
How are things now with them since you have gotten out?
Well, after I came out, by that point, my father, at least the man who I grew up knowing was my father until 53 years old, or me
Mm.
turning 53, then I found out he wasn't my real father.
Wow.
So he was dead by the time I extracted myself and family.
Mm.
My
Okay.
mom, the primary reason to move back to California after I extracted us was to be a help to my mom, and she received me
Mm.
with arms of grace in spite of the pains that she received by my
Wow.
cultic decisions.
Mm.
And my extended family has kept their distance, and
Okay.
they remember me when I was young. I was a wild child. I did time.
Mm.
I was the family drunk and drug addict and drug dealer and all that. So,
Mm.
I'm not very attractive in their eyes, and it's my fault, a lot of it.
Yeah.
So I don't
Mhm.
hold it against them.
Yeah.
And then my sister, I had two sisters. One's deceased, and the one who's alive here in the Sacramento area, she's received me with arms of grace, and
Mm.
she's just a great, great person, and she's
That's
extended
awesome.
love to my daughters, and
Mm. Oh, I love that.
yeah, she's she's good as gold.
Oh, that's so awesome. And I bet that's so neat for her to, though she probably missed out on or did miss out on so much of their growing up years,
Yeah,
how neat that she can be a part of their, even as adults, and older, that she can be a part of their lives now. I think that's so neat. I think of my parents' family. I'm sure Chris and Warren. I felt that way about them welcoming, my family back after all the years. Same thing, so much,
yeah,
how we treated other people was terrible. And to see
Oh,
that grace of open arms, of family coming back. I have a picture of my cousin Brett and I. So he was my age, like the closest of us cousins in age. And we were really close when all of a sudden, their family was marked. And so all of a sudden as a child, like he's my best friend. What happened, And so I remember being very confused. Of course, I prayed every night, like, please help their family to get right with you, Lord. Obviously, they're wrong. I don't know what they're doing wrong, but they're wrong. And so just a lot of confusion as a child over that. And then I have this picture that I just love of us a couple years ago at Thanksgiving. Like he had come into the house and someone took a picture and I like gave him this huge bear hug. And it's just like so cool that now we're raising our kids together, and I do get
mhm.
emotional like every time I just like we're at the beach and everyone's like all of our kids are hanging out together. I'm just like it makes me sad that we miss so much time together, but at the same time I'm just like so grateful that we get to be friends now, and there's had to be some apologies and it's tough and we're all raised with it and or when you're raised in it like that, you don't really have the choice. It's not like we did that, but
Right.
just awful. It's so sad how damaged so many families. And unfortunately too, you have a lot that
Thousands of families.
so many. And
Yeah.
it's so harmful. And I know like for me, and I've talked about this before a little bit, but it took me a long time. And I feel like maybe you and I have talked about this a little bit too, but a long time for me to think like, oh, this was a cult, or even that it was a bad experience. Cause I'm like, oh, lots of people have things so much worse. And maybe even you with your background as a young person, maybe I would think maybe you could have similar thoughts, but like, oh, there's so much worse out there. Like it wasn't that bad. For years I did that. And then therapy, I finally decided therapy because, things were falling in together just like I thought they would. And it did not take long for the therapist to be like, "So, basically a cult?" And I'm like, "No, no, it was like a church." And then try to explain it away like it's
Right.
not what it is or it's not that bad. But you look at the damage it created in so many families and in so many lives, like talking about how you said, um, being so angry at God, and I think that's a very interesting point, and I actually would love to talk about that a little bit, because I know I've had a struggle being raised in it, especially like it was all I ever knew. And so I feel like I ever, even I was just talking to someone at church recently, and I said, I don't know that I was really ever saved as a kid. I just remember being afraid because someone had gotten bit by a black widow and they were gonna die, maybe, and all. And that's why I'm like, please God, I want to go to heaven. So I'm like, does that qualify? I don't really think so. But but it was so fear-based that looking
Yes.
back, anything I learned biblically or about God was so skewed. And so it's taking me a long time, and I'm still in the middle of it, I feel like, to really learn what do I believe, and what is God to me? Because we had so much indoctrination of just false, even like I was thinking, like, remember how the kids used to have to stand up and say verses? I was terrified of that. It did the
Yeah.
opposite of what it was supposed to do because it
Yeah.
caused me so much anxiety as a kid, and, it was awful. And I think, like, I even now, I do not know Bible verses. I don't know, like, I could not say if someone says, besides like John 3:16, but if they say, a certain, I wouldn't know what verse goes with those numbers because it was so fear based and I still carry so much anxiety about it that I still have a lot of trouble around biblical things. Like I believe in
Yeah.
God. I know he loves me. We go to a church now that where we're very happy, which that took a long time because,
Mhm.
that's a whole, you did that too, I'm sure. But
Yeah.
it's, I love to hear a little bit your standpoint on religion. There's so many people who come from cultic groups, cultic situations, and I think especially religious ones, and you experience religious and spiritual abuse and you turn away completely. It seems
Yeah.
it happens all the time. I don't judge people for it at all because I've been there. Like I know how that works. The abuse side of that. And so I always think it's interesting to talk to people who still do have belief.
Yeah.
And I know you talked about that struggle. Why don't we talk a little bit more about that if you're open to that, and just kind of how that looked for you and what ultimately like changed your mind or kind of got you going in this direction again?
So when I exited stage left from the cult with my family, we did have some connections that we were beginning to make
Mm,
with some people in a Bible study.
mm,
Because my youngest daughter, started going to a private school that was faith based,
mm,
and that's how we made the connection. So we had a launching ground or a place to land when we left, and we
mm,
were part of that church out east for about a year, and then we relocated back to California. So my anger didn't really begin until about a year after residing back in the California area.
mm,
So when we came back here, we were a part of a church at that point too that we felt fairly comfortable with, and so there did not stop me from participating and seeking the Lord day to day. I would
mm,
pour out my heart because I felt like from a fire I went through from the age of 25 to 35, I had confidence that the Lord could hear all the crap that would come out of my mouth about how I felt about him and about others. And I
mm,
gained that confidence in that relationship. So even though I was absolutely vehemently pissed off at him, I
mhm.
still continued to seek him daily, to read the Bible daily,
Wow.
express how I felt daily.
Mm.
And this went on for 5 years. I mean, I was the little kid that thrashed around on the floor in front of his mom and dad, and was flipping his finger at him, and I giving the F word to him because I
Yes.
was so pissed off that
Oh,
I'd be back in the Bible the next day, reading and seeking him,
wow.
and crying out, and so
Mm,
it went on and on and on, and the drinking went on and on and on.
mm,
It was a sick cycle.
mm,
So I didn't leave functioning in my faith. And I
mm.
understand that that is just from observation from many of the people that you and I were part of. When they exited stage left, they were done.
Yeah.
They're so sick in their heart and pained and troubled, I believe, that this is my opinion, maybe many of them, their hearts never were able to heal,
Yeah.
or because nobody else was viable within the group to help them on the outside.
Right.
Therapy,
Yep.
and or sharing your story with somebody, so that somebody, please hear my story, somebody please understand me. uh,
Right.
and that's a different part of a cult, because in
Mm.
the American mind we think of groups like Jim Jones and David
Right.
Koresh. That's how we equate to a cult. uh,
Right.
so anyhow, I still have a strong filter.
Mm.
Like, I don't trust most ministers,
Yeah.
even if I sit underneath them, I don't trust them.
Right. Yep. Yeah. Yeah. Well, and it and it is, I know we've done the church hopping thing, and same, it took us a while to even like go to church, because for everyone that's listening, churches were very bad. We were right. All churches were bad. We didn't call ourselves a church because we couldn't take a name, and because what was even the reasoning behind the not being able to have a name?
Well,
Because
the
only God.
church was the body of people.
Yes. So we didn't need a name. We couldn't take a name, and we just called it
Church,
meetings.
the building as a church.
Yes, right. Remember the little song? Da, 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 da. Oh, ew, oh, that's burned in there. So yeah, so it took us a long time to even, and I feel like Dwayne was even more resistant than I was. I was kind of just like, church, let's go to church. We can do whatever we want. And I had started working at a church preschool though, because Dakota was preschool age a couple years after we got out. And so that's what kind of got us starting to go to churches. But we hopped around quite a bit, and I had just the hardest time listening to anything. It was just such a turn
Yeah.
off. It was so triggering. And again, I don't think we had done no healing at that point either. We just were floundering out there in the world like, "Oh, we have to make our own decisions. What do we do on Friday nights?" And so it was very hard, to like all of a sudden you might be 30, but you literally have never made a choice in your life. So it was very triggering and hard to get to a place where like now we feel comfortable at where we're at and I really enjoy it. But I still like, I might hear something and I have to remind myself, you do not have to agree with every word you hear.
Right.
Like, and so it's more of and I think it's more of a self-recovery thing. It's the therapy and the books and whatever people need to do to
Mhm.
to heal, but it's more that than finding the right church or because you're never gonna agree with everything, and I think
Sure.
we were raised like, you have to agree with this, and this is what you do, and if you don't agree, there's gonna be problems. So, I think, for those that and I see so many from our groups too, that also will hop right into a church situation or a church group and yet they still haven't done the healing, and it might
Yeah.
look okay from the outside, and I think probably they're in a better boat than they were before, but there's still that abuse on the inside that doesn't get healed, and that's where I like having these conversations where people aren't afraid to get help, and it might be
Yeah.
different kind of help. We all kind of, eh, differently learn things, so that's okay. No, there's no right or wrong way, I guess, but that's where I like sharing these stories, and I think it is valuable for other people to understand, like, oh, well, Mike said he did therapy and he's a pretty cool guy. So, and I just think whatever it takes for someone to get the help that they need, I think it's so important and valuable because it's hard to just jump out of something like that. And you really don't know what to do. Like we had a lot of rough years after that and really it's only been the last couple years where we've actually like done real healing and real work on realizing as I struggle with mental health situations, realizing that catches up with you if you just ignore it and put it under the
Mhm.
rug like we were taught to do. It catches up with you eventually, and so it's not fun, but it's a lot of work, and I think I talk about this all the time, but I think people, they don't want to put the work into recovery because it's a lot of work and it's messy and it's painful,
Mhm.
but it's worth it. And so I just like, that's why I love what you're doing. Um, because it's another person getting some words out there that might affect someone
Yeah.
in the right way. And why don't we talk about that a little bit and what you're doing with your book? Because that's very exciting.
So probably about 5 years ago, I was spurred by my daughters to write a book, and I do have a son too, by the way, but he didn't spur me. He's more of a neutral character, but he's a good guy. Uh, and then I had some friends spur me along the way. And
Mm,
then lo and behold, about 2 years after that, on a Thanksgiving day, I had a gentleman who was the father of both of my daughter's friends,
mm,
and they all came over for Thanksgiving, and he was the liaison for book writers in the Christian realm
hmm.
to Christian book publishers like Zondervan and other names. Zondervan's the
Wow.
biggest one there. But since the advent of KDP, Kindle Direct Publishing, which is Amazon, his job kind of took a sideline, so to speak, in being
Mm,
the intermediary to publishers and book writers and publishers. So anyhow, he was kind of a stepping stone to get information and some help to me. And then ultimately, the time came. I'll just be straight up. My wife was a little resistant to the idea of writing a book because it creates a lot of exposure,
mhm,
and
mhm,
also resistant to me doing YouTube.
mhm.
Uh, Again, it creates exposure. and
Yeah.
she's since changed her view. And I kind of held off on the book because I didn't want to create tension between us, and I wanted her to be on board. And she goes, I saw in the Sierra College directory that there's a lady who's going to put on a seminar online. This is during COVID, I think, or at the end of it, in regards to writing a book. So, I figured, well, maybe this is God telling me it's time to write, because I did express to him, I said, I feel like it's on my heart from you to write it. And maybe that was the answer. So within a week after watching the lady seminar, which really wasn't that great, and you were on it too. That's how
we
we
reconnected. I didn't even know if I knew you lived back here at that point yet, but
So
it's crazy.
it's like I had my screen blacked out and you had yours on. So I was like, that's Shannon Bowen. That's the little girl who lived down the street and was in the same cult as me.
Yes.
So anyhow,
Crazy.
and then Shannon, you text me or you wrote me through the
Oh yeah.
the portal, and I said, well, it's me, it's Mike Boyd. And you're like, OMG, it is him. So anyhow, that's how we got here today.
Yeah, it is. It really is.
So about a week after that, I started to write, and it flowed out of me, and I prayed to the Lord every time I wrote a chapter. I had no end game in the book.
Wow.
But my end game in my heart was I want to help people, because it's a painful thing to work through. So I wrote, I think it's a 13 chapter book. It's a short read. It's about 130 pages. And what I talk about is some of my experience. I talk about some commonalities in cults. I talk about some of the confusion in the American mind about cults. I talk about what draws people in. I talk about a lot of my own story, because I believe everybody has a story to tell. Everybody matters. Everybody counts.
Yep.
And then ultimately I come to the last chapter. And the last chapter is where I provide the hope and healing. And it sounds so simple, but I believe it is in applying the 12 steps that are part of AA, NA, and that we use at Celebrate Recovery. And I rewrite them in a way where they're palatable for people who have experienced cultic or spiritual abuse. So they're more digestible. And in the book, I don't use a whole lot of scripture. I'm not trying to correct people theologically. I'm trying to help them resonate in their heart with my heart or other people's hearts, and bring them to a place where they can hopefully open up and express their experience, because I think that's where healing begins, is telling your story and finding the right trusted individual. It can be difficult, and you're going to find people who are cross-eyed when you share your story. I have some of those people in my life, and I have some people who genuinely just listened and still accepted me, still loved and cared about me. And those are the people that you need to pray to God to help you find.
Yeah.
And that's where it starts. And I believe in therapy too. I've done some of that with my wife, with a therapist. And then my two daughters they have used exit counselors specifically for their traumatic experience.
Yeah. I think that's great. And I think that, and how old were your girls or all your kids when you left?
So my oldest was, I think, probably 21.
Okay. Wow.
And my youngest was 15. Yeah, she was probably 14, and she was 14, and my oldest was probably 19 at that point.
Oh my gosh. Wow.
Yeah.
Was your oldest?
My son was in between.
In between. Okay.
Yeah, he was probably 18.
And none of them were married yet?
Thank God.
When you left?
Hey, that would have made it even more complicated, right?
Oh, that's so good. Yes. Well, and that's why I've talked to so many, and kind of more, some that I'm thinking of in particular in your age group, more where they had kids that were barely married too during this, exodus that we did. And it's so sad. Like, one of them wants to be on the podcast, but she's like, I just can't talk about it publicly yet because it'll cause problems with the little that she's able to see her daughter, it will probably take care of that completely. So I'm glad yours weren't married. But it is sad. And there again, that's where it's still dividing families. It's still damaging families. I
Yeah.
know my husband's family has a lot that are still in, and it's disgusting, the damage that it's still causing between families today.
Yeah.
It's awful. It's just disgusting. And I love um I will share in the notes for anyone that's listening all of the information on where you can find Mike's book. Because do you have a website that you could share with us too?
No website, but
Okay.
on Facebook, or
Okay.
not, you can, on Facebook, Colt Candy, and then on YouTube, it's Colt
YouTube.
Candy, and then
Perfect.
on KDP, which is Amazon, it's Colt Candy, and then the subtitle is offering hope, healing, and understanding by those taken in by these masters of spiritual deceit.
Mm, yeah.
Yeah,
I love that.
and the book is currently, so it was just re-edited, so
Okay.
it is going to be relaunched by Christian Faith Publishing, CFP, and it's going to be
Okay.
on 7 platforms. It's going to be on Kobo, it's going to be on Ingram, it's going to be back on KDP, it's going to be on Google Play, it's going to be on Apple. I think there's 7 platforms, and then CFP's own website. So the
Nice.
professional editing was just completed. It's like we went back and forth and back and forth, and I stayed with the same book cover. It's no
Okay.
different. So technically, it's a second edition,
Okay.
and that's when that's going to happen. It's coming down the pipe where it's relaunched, and there'll be a big media blitz.
Okay, good. Well, I'll definitely
Yeah,
share when that happens too. And I think, yeah, I love making sure to get all the books that are written out there to anyone that is interested, because I know different books impact different people, and even different stories impact different people. Because you
yeah,
connect with one a lot more than another. And so I just think it's like you said earlier, everyone's story is important and worth sharing. And
yeah. I
that's
believe
why I
that.
started this podcast in the first place, was when I kind of started on social media talking a little bit more about my past. I got all these people start reaching out to me. And what was interesting too is a lot of people from our cult were reaching out to me like, "Oh my gosh, thank you for actually calling it a cult. Thank you for being so honest and all." And
Yeah,
I'm like, "Oh, wow." And then I had talked to a couple that had, really we kind of went back and forth, and I'm like, "I'm gonna do it." And then I was on a lot of podcasts too, but I'm like, "I'm gonna do a podcast," because all these stories are so important. And I think, again, we can learn from everyone's story, but we connect with some a little bit more. And I just think, like with this one, I hope that I know a lot of people from our cult listen to this. So this is, I want him to hear you. I want him to hear like this situation, and two, that there's hope, And I think so many people get caught up in the shame of, oh, I joined that. Like I willingly joined something that was that. How
right,
was I that stupid? And yet it happens every single day in a ton of different cults. And like you were talking, what did you call the sweet, the kind of the love bombing, that initial, all the good that you can see in this group. And that's the reason for joining, so there's
right.
usually people aren't joining to be a terrible person. They're joining because of a good thing, and then it turns into what it is, and it's time to go. you know
That's the great paradox, is people wanting to better themselves, but ultimately they may find that they have become a part of a cult after they've vested themselves and are well into it. So it's difficult
Yeah,
to see the sour.
right. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. In Yanya Lalich, she is an expert, a cool expert, and she talks about moral injury, where, even
Mhm.
so, we were involved in this cult, and we may have caused harm to other people as well because
Yeah,
of the leadership we're following. And I love when she talks about it, because people forget about that aspect of, like, I was just talking to someone last week, I think, on a live stream about that. Like, I remember my sister and her husband had left our cult for a while before the big, mass exodus. And I remember being so judgmental and so mean to her, all these choices she was making and just
Mhm.
so unpleasant to her. And yet that was what I was trained to do, you know? And so, yes,
Exactly.
I have apologized to her for being such a jerk, you know? And yet, I was doing what I truly at the time thought was right. I thought it was helpful to her for me to be mean to her. So
Yeah,
but it's another part of that recovery process that I think gets overlooked sometimes, where we kind of have to relieve ourselves of some of that and acknowledge it,
mhm.
and then, kind of process it, because I think that gets forgotten sometimes. But it's true. It's like you're trained to do these terrible things.
I agree with you wholeheartedly. I have had to go back and apologize to some people within the
Mm,
cult and people from without. And
yeah.
part of the 12 steps in the book that is in there.
Yeah.
And
See, and that's
it's a
a
tough
great point.
it's tough to look into the mirror.
Yeah. Right. Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. Yes. So how are you now? How's the family now? How has recovery, processing all this? I know it's a forever journey. It's never over. But how are things going now with you?
Well, I would say it's a journey, and I said that earlier. And there's going to be
Mhm.
things that are spurred in my mind, and that I have to reflect back on and look at and consider for my own mental health.
Yeah.
And for my wife, I would say again, it's been a journey, and she's very open to looking into the mirror of her life and
Mm.
asking God for help and looking for guidance. And the I would say, with my kids, uh, I like to say they're all believers, and they have their struggles too, and
Mhm.
I think it had a tremendous impact on them.
Mm.
And but we love our kids, and they're good apples, and
Yeah, that's awesome.
they're the ones who willingly sought help on their own. It wasn't because we sent them to
Mm.
a exit counselor. It was their own
Mm.
choice, which is
Wow, that's
commendable.
great. Yeah,
So
that's great.
yeah, so we all have varying degrees of ups and downs, but we're still connected and getting
Good.
ready to celebrate Thanksgiving with our clan down in
Right.
Arizona here.
Oh,
Looking forward to
yay.
that. Yeah. So
Good.
we're not
That's very
we're,
exciting.
yeah, we're disjointed by real estate and distance, but not
Yeah.
numbers.
Good, good. I'm curious what would you say to someone, because there's a lot I feel like in your age group, and like you to my parents' age group maybe, that are still involved in the cult. If you could say anything to one of them, if they were listening, what would you say with your experience of been in it and being out now?
Well, I think uh, I
Besides
have
read
some
your book.
ideas. I got lots of ideas. Um, I, I don't think everybody really deserves a textbook response that you pull off the shelf. I think everybody's a little different, maybe, in their
Mhm, mhm.
experience and the impact it had. But I think uh, if God is not in the picture in your life, then that would be the starting ground. Give him another chance, and
Mm,
I think he could open some doors to your heart that maybe you don't
mm.
see,
Yeah.
and help heal those. And it does take time, and
Mhm.
he doesn't download everything on you at once. I think getting out of the isolation, if that's a part of your life, is a key component. It's
Yeah.
rubbing shoulders with other people, having different entities of people that you can, not just one, but
Right.
multiple,
Right.
where you can talk about your life, and it doesn't always have to be the cult stuff. That one you want to be a little
Mhm.
more selective, but
Right.
it's easy to isolate. It's easy
Yeah.
to hide and stuff the pain, and
Mhm.
it never worked for me, and I don't believe it works for anybody.
Right.
Yeah, I
Right.
think it needs to be shared. A
Yeah.
therapist, uh,
Mhm.
applying the 12 steps in the book called Colt Candy,
Yep.
and praying to God for, can you bring the right people into my life
Mm,
that can hear my deep, dark sorrow and my losses
mm,
and all that I went through,
mhm.
and He'll
Yeah.
come through.
Yeah. And I do think that's like, again, why I'm doing the podcast, but it's so valuable to share our stories. And I know everyone shares in different ways. Everyone's comfortable in, whether it's speaking or writing or whatever, but there are so many resources now for
Oh
this
yeah,
type of thing. Like I have a friend that does a program called Writing to Reckon, and everything's virtual now, so you can sit in your little, jammies if you want to, and do if it's a writing thing or if it's a speaking thing or if it's kind of like a support group type thing. There's so many things virtually that are available. There's podcasts. Like that was one of the things that very first kind of
oh
brought
yeah.
me out to realizing, I first of all, I was invited on a lot, but listening to, I love cult podcasts now, but listening to really, all the whole spectrum of cults. I watch a lot of documentaries too.
Oh,
That's my jam. But I like obsessed. I have a
there's
spreadsheet.
some good ones out there.
Yes. Oh my gosh. There's a new one that just came out this last week, and I've been so busy, so I haven't been able to watch it yet. So actually, I might watch it today. I might have to have that on the background while I'm working. But yes, I love, like, there's just so much that, again, it could be completely different than what I grew up in, but there's still information that connects and is valuable. And it's just, there's a lot out there. So I
Yeah,
just think for anyone I know, I'm like, just there's information out there. I'm never going to stuff it down people's throat, but I think sharing your story on whatever level, even if it's just writing to yourself in a journal, write that motion of writing down your story is so valuable, reading it back to yourself. But gosh, if you could and I think for so many, I'll speak for myself too, but that come from a cultic type group, it community, as much as humans, I think as we crave community, it's also very triggering
mhm,
for people that come from these kind of backgrounds. And I just went this last month to St. Louis to do a story jam. Basically, it was all cult survivors, and it was great. uh but we had to learn kind of what triggered some people, because here we are as a group putting on a performance and doing this event, and yet at the same time we don't want to seem culty. So it was an interesting experience, and we're going to continue to do it.
right.
It's going to be a yearly thing, and it was very impactful. But also, like, a certain performer was really triggered by the I mean, me included, but the hierarchy of it, how it seemed like this person's in charge, and this, and because of my personality, I'm a very
Mm,
take charge person, and oh, I'm going to do this, and oh, I need help there too. And so I had to talk to this person and just say, I'm completely sorry, because I'm just that personality, but I completely understand where you're coming from, and I get that, and so we're learning, like, okay, we
right.
got to keep this going, but also weird things are very culty to a lot of us, so it's very interesting.
Definitely.
It's very interesting when you have this kind of yeah, especially when you get a lot of people with a lot of different backgrounds. But it was a lot of fun. But again, there's resources out there. There's so much out there for people that have come from these kind of environments and communities. And oh, I know where I was going with that. I still feel that community is so valuable and important for me personally. I know that having friends I can trust, that I can talk to about this crazy stuff, also having friends from my cult that we can laugh about and make fun of,
Right.
and, throw some humor into it, is also really important for me, because I definitely heal through humor a lot. And it's pretty fun now to, like, have people that we grew up with, that we were kind of split apart with for quite a while, over in our backyard having a beer and laughing our asses off at some of the stuff that we endured and went through. And we're just like how? Like, what? So I love having community from both sides
Exactly.
because it's pretty. Yeah, there's a lot of humor when you're on the other side. Probably not so much when it was in, but
Yeah,
it's
I'd
good to have
agree.
community. Yeah. Oh
Yeah,
gosh, but
we
yeah.
experienced a lot of the same stuff, sharing the different anomalies of our function that were just odd. And it's just like, we would just have to laugh at it. It's like, how in the world did we get
Right.
there?
Right. Right. It is amazing. And meeting new
Yeah.
people is always fun too. I started a new working for a new company last year, and Dwayne would meet me there sometimes afterwards. And anyway, the owners, we're friends with them now. But they're like one of the first nights, they're like, do you guys want to go to dinner with us? We're like, sure. So we have our kids and everything. We go to dinner. And so we barely knew these people. And our kids went to school together though. And so the kids knew each other. So we're sitting across from them at dinner. And so they're like, so how did you guys meet? And I'm like, oh, I love this question. I'm like, well, we met in a cult. And there's like, so now they laugh all the time because that was like literally what I said. And they're like, oh my gosh. So anytime they're talking about like movies and I just give them a blank stare, they're like, oh, that's right. You were raised in a cult. I'm like, yep, I don't know that
Yeah.
movie. So it's a lot of fun. I like the shock factor. It's good times. But
Yeah. There's a
and then
little
the people,
bit
the
of a
new people are always like, how did you turn out normal? And I'm like, I don't know. You call this normal, but thank you.
Yeah, there's definitely a blackout period, is what I would call it, for people who have been raised in a cult, like my wife.
Mm.
Movies and different bands. The names,
Yes.
somebody talks about them, and she has no clue, so she
Yeah.
just kind of nods her head, like, "Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yes, it's hilarious. It's so great. It's so great. I'm just so happy you guys are on the other side though. I'm so like proud that you're getting your words out there, sharing with community. I think especially coming from you, someone that has been in our type of group, because there's so many that are our type. I think that's going to
yeah,
be very valuable with that kind of religious spiritual abuse background, coming from that and using the recovery that you've learned over the years, programs or been through, to kind of reprocess that and put it into a form that's easy, because recovery is hard. So having an easy kind of guide to get
yeah,
started is very valuable. So thank you for making it easy. Very, very nice for us.
yeah."
Is there anything else that you would like to share before we end our call here?
Well, I can always think of more to talk about, but I appreciate the
We may have to do
opportunity.
like monthly episodes with you.
I just, if you were to look across the landscape of history and look at the landscape of geography across the globe, there are millions and millions of people that have been burned spiritually
Mm.
by physical abuse, sexual abuse, and emotional abuse.
Yeah.
And the crimes that have been committed against these people,
Mm.
don't think they got away with it. Someday they're going to stand before a creator, and he's going to address what happened.
Mm.
And we don't always get the opportunity to see the justice that needed to be executed, at least we thought, in our own presence. It does not work that way most of the time.
Mhm.
Me and my own personal experience, I saw justice executed a couple times, and it was hard not to gloat,
Mm.
but he'll deal with it.
Yeah.
There is an awesome creator who's going to deal with it.
Mm.
The day of
It's
reckoning will
nice.
come.
Yeah. Yeah.